Oscar and Grammy award-winning artist Common once stated, "We live in a world where it's more okay to follow than to lead." In this world, being a leader is trouble for the system that we're all accustomed to. Being a leader in this day and age is being a threat. Not many people stood up against the system we all call life. And why is that? Why are there so few leaders when the need for leadership is ever present? You know, my grandmother would always tell me that you don't know what you don't know. And I think it's incredible what being exposed to the right information and the proper conditions can do for an individual and who they become. Right now, we're living in a time where we could use a refresher course on being human towards one another. And I think that we can start a chain reaction with a very simple act. It's my hope that by the end of this talk, we can make inspiring ourselves and one another a habit, because a lack of inspiration and those leaders to inspire action will be the end of us all. So first, we'll discuss how to identify where we and many others fall in the inspiration spectrum and why it's so important to be comfortable where we fall, because we all fluctuate. Next, we'll move into the nurturing factor. How do we grow our inspiration? And we'll discuss the 3 E's: education, empowerment, and exposure. And lastly, we'll discuss what your job's going to be and why it's so important that we try to harbor as much inspiration as we possibly can right now. So let's get started. According to a 2011 article posted in the Harvard Business Review entitled "Why Inspiration Matters," psychologists Todd Thrash and Andrew Elliott developed what's called the inspiration scale. They measured how frequently we experience inspiration in our everyday lives. The article goes on to speak on inspiration being an organic feeling. And I agreed so much so that I wanted to develop my own tool to help us better gauge and identify the frequencies that we feel inspiration and want to inspire others. The inspiration spectrum is broken into 3 tiers, and I'll give you an example of when I found myself in each of these tiers to better relate. I chose some characters in pop culture with some notable quirks that I feel we've all seen in our everyday lives to help us better gauge and identify as well. Now, I do understand that these stories are fictional, but I am going to ask you to suspend your disbelief, because the messages are there, given the proper method. So for our lower inspired tiers, I chose 2 examples to illustrate the introvert and the extroverted example. For our introverted example, I chose NBC's The Office, Mr. Kevin Malone. And if you're unfamiliar with Kevin, here are a few words to describe his character. Kevin's normally seen as quiet, a little lackadaisical, happy to sit in the background and let things play out, but he does have a likability that draws people to him. And in Kevin's case, even after being fired from Dunder Mifflin, he was able to open his own bar and even reconcile the differences that he had had with past coworkers. For our extroverted example, I chose Mr. Andy Dwyer. And if you're unfamiliar with Andy, here are a few words to describe his character. Andy is normally seen as bubbling over with energy, but lacking that direction and that motivation to move to the next tier. So he's normally written off as a troublemaker. I chose these 2 individuals because they have all the tools and the keys that they need to inspire themselves and others, but they may lack that motivation and the direction to move to that next tier. And I found myself dealing with this particular tier when I'm working with the youth of my nonprofit, Young Brothers Academy. Myself, along with Justice Cox and Braylon Jones, set out to create the entity that we needed when we were younger. So it's easy to identify what type of inspiration that these young men need, being someone who's already been in their shoes at one point in time before. And that's extremely important to our next tier. I couldn't think of a more middle or median character than NBC's The Office's Mr. Jim Halpert. Now, a quote from Jim is that, "I've always believed that if you want to impress your boss, you come in and you do mediocre work half-heartedly." Jim had absolutely no intentions of assuming any leadership roles at Dunder Mifflin, but he has all of the qualities: witty, mild-mannered, may lack the vision to get there, but he has all of the determination and the skill set. When Jim began Dunder Mifflin, he had absolutely no intentions of assuming that leadership role, but being exposed to the right information and the proper conditions, found himself in multiple leadership positions, and then later leaving Dunder Mifflin to start his own company. Jim is someone I like to call the bridge builder or our floater. They understand what it's like to teeter that line of having their inspiration sparked and what it's like to be floating aimlessly. But they walk a very fine line, because all it takes is the right motivation to push them to that next tier, or the lack thereof to push them backwards. I found myself operating in this tier my sophomore year in high school. I had speech and debate as a class, but I had absolutely no intentions of contributing to the class. I just like to make people laugh. And my speech and debate coach pulled me to the side one day, and he very clearly explained to me that I had the potential to do this, and I could be the reason for the crowd, or I could be in the crowd. But the choice was completely up to me, but the disruptions had to go. So that statement stuck with me, and that's led me all the way to this point, this evening. But we'll get to that. Lastly, I couldn't think of a higher operating inspired individual than Parks and Recreation's Ms. Leslie Knope. Leslie is the epitome of what it means to be a leader, tenacious, constantly exposing herself to new information and experiences, making sure that she's as headstrong as she possibly can be for the greater good. She understands the power of people and ever moving the needle forward. But the one disadvantage that I found operating in this particular tier is that you're constantly pouring into people, and you may find that that feeling isn't being reciprocated. So we have to find habits and ways to combat those negative feelings when we are feeling alone. Whether you find yourself in that lower, the middle, or the higher operating tiers, the importance of the inspiration spectrum is about determining your dedication to inspiring yourself and others. But now that we have an idea of where we and many others may fall on that spectrum, how do we grow that inspiration? We grow it through the 3 E's: education, empowerment, and exposure. In school, we all learned that a seed needs light, soil, and water to reach its most full potential. Well, think of us as human beings, and our light, soil, and water are education, empowerment, and exposure. Education. These are our relationships inside and outside of the classroom. True understanding is the common ground for a student's willingness to want to teach and that teacher's willingness to want to learn. So it's extremely important to try to find a mentor when you're trying to grow your vision or your idea. And in the case that you're unable to find a mentor, try seeking that knowledge yourself, because one thing that's going to show you is your dedication to your growth. And if you're working with a mentor, it's also going to show that dedication to them. When I began writing books, I was floating aimlessly. I didn't have any resources and I didn't have any mentor. So I took it upon myself to try to find out as much information as I possibly could about being a children's author. I signed up for workshops, I signed up for character development, I signed up for illustrating workshops until I got comfortable with the information that I had gained, that I was able to share that information with others. And once I shared that I had a book that I wanted to combat social injustice, other people began to tell people that idea. Before I knew it, I had culminated a relationship with my publisher and so many other individuals who've contributed to my longevity of being a children's author. Empowerment. Empowerment is the common ground to share and receive inspiration. We all understand that an idea can be diminished with the power or the weight of words, so it's important to pick and choose your words wisely when you're looking to inspire or encourage someone. The power to create or destroy lies in the mind, so it's ultimately not what we say, but how we say it and what we receive that ultimately lays the bricks of the things to come. Now, in the event that you're finding yourself dealing with these negative emotions or these negative feelings, it's important to have those healthy habits in play to combat those feelings. And one thing that I've learned that helps me is positive affirmations. A powerful I am statement compared to an I think I can. Holding a powerful song in your head that really gets you going. I enjoy Outkast. Holding a powerful image inside your mind that encourages you. And I've brought a piece of that with me this evening, who's my grandmother. Empowerment is about good energy. And seeing as how we know it can't be created or destroyed, only transferred from one party to the next, it's important to be cautious of the energy that we receive and that we give out when we're looking to encourage somebody. And exposure. Exposure is this moment right here. Exposure, tied hand in hand with education, is extremely important because we need to make sure that we are experiencing as many different cultures, avenues, races, anything, to make sure that our perspectives are ever expanding. Exposure is the difference between being a local artist and having your exhibition in the High Museum of Art, or even having the vision to do so. Exposure sustains your vision. The more that we're able to see and put our hands on, the more that we're able to do, the more the wheels of innovation will continue to turn, the more leaders will be inspired to act, the longer that our story can continue. Education, empowerment, exposure, light, soil, water. 10 years ago, 4 months and 8 days, I told myself that I would give a TED Talk. Being exposed to Mr. Simon Sinek, here I am, 10 years, 4 months, and 8 days later. Lastly, we'll discuss what your job's going to be and why it's so important that we try to harbor as much inspiration as we possibly can right now. We all understand that a world without inspiration is lost, doomed to live the life of the lateral and the mundane. But I truly believe that having an understanding of where we may fall on the spectrum, combined with these 3 pillars, we can make sure that our most creative and innovative ideas are constantly being brought to the table for our survival as a species. But that can't happen without having shared ideas and conversations. It's up to us. We have to make sure that we're leading each other to the right places. And in the event that we have found our inspiration, it's important to grow it through education and empowerment and exposure to make sure that our ideas and our visions reach their most full potential. In the events that we face roadblocks, it's important to have healthy habits in place so that we can continue on and so that we exercise our inspiration muscles by practicing the act of inspiring ourselves and others daily. And that we treat it with urgency. Because a world without inspiration is doomed to repeat its past. So the next time that you encounter an individual that you feel that you may not understand, take the time to consider if their inspiration's been sparked and what you may be able to do to push them to that next tier. Because it's up to us, all of us. Thank you.